Okay. Ready?
Yep.
All right. Shit. I should have thought of a funny intro thing to say. I had a really good one for last week's. It was the only show where we train in 1,000-ton ankle weights and open the 6 inner gates so that we can run circles around the more liberal podcasts. I don't know if I'll have anything that good though. Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to Neighbor Science, the only podcast about political economy and fluctuating gravity wells. I'm Ryan Salisbury, and today I have a friend of the show, Abdul Malik, to reunite for our Gunbuster Diebuster series. How you doing, Abdul?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to get into Diebuster. It's been a while, but
Yeah.
as someone who's slowly feeling themselves like become a weeb in real time, I'm very excited to talk this. Like I was mentioning this to you off pod, but like I've been watching significantly more anime and also playing 100-hour JRPGs. And I think my Catboy body pillow is in the mail right now as well.
Yeah, becoming a weeb feels like being diagnosed with a terminal illness, but without knowing that you'll never have the sweet release of death.
Yeah, I'm one of those people who went to Japan before they became a weeb. I did the whole thing in reverse, so now I'm excited to go back and tell everyone Japan they're not acting they're not acting Japanese enough.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Hermes is not feeling well today, so he was not able to join us. But I'm hoping that he'll return for the Aim for the Top 3 anime that is coming out. When did we figure out it was? Was it this year or next year?
I
Can't remember.
think wasn't it end of this year? I'm
There's
just
so much
gonna
good shit that's
Google
going to
it.
come out at the end of this year.
Yeah, it's I'm actually like really into the Aim for the Top anime, especially after seeing both of these together. It's like each one has a different spin on it. I think one is obviously better than the other.
Yeah.
It was okay. It was released. It doesn't have a firm release date yet, but it's expected to come out either at the end of this year or sometime at the beginning of next year.
Okay. Well, that's good because this page says it may come after 2022. So hopefully it's
Okay,
not that long.
the Wikipedia article for it said that some other anime from Gainax is coming out in 2022, so oh no,
Yeah.
it may mean Gunbuster 3 could come later than that. Okay,
Ugh.
well, I mean, future neighbor science, in the post-apocalypse, will hopefully we will all be living on the fucking in a municipalist paradise, watching anime and also farming.
Yeah, exactly. So this other thing that they're talking about, Udo in Blue, is a sequel to another Gainax thing from the 80s that we should probably watch. Royal Space Force, The Wings of Oniames. That's a French
This
word that
looks
I actually can't pronounce. That's pretty rare.
this looks extremely good. Like I'm just looking at the art right now, and
Yeah, it looks cool.
the more Zeppelins, the better. I will say that.
Plus, it has a very Top Gun looking plane.
Yeah, and lots of clouds. Clouds in anime are beautiful. Clouds
Yeah.
and food, I think, are the two things that anime animates best.
Yes.
We just watched the 2004 degenerate American film Sky Captain: The World of Tomorrow for the first
Hell
time in
yeah.
like 5 to 10 years. Man, that movie holds up, but it holds up on the strength of its Zeppelin game. I will say that more than anything else.
Have you ever watched Last Exile? That's an anime all about Zeppelins.
I have the DVD box set of Last Exile. I got rid of all my DVDs, but I kept two, and Last Exile was one of them. And it came with
Nice.
like a little pack-in figure of one of the main characters in the box, which I still haven't opened.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's extremely good.
Okay, so we are talking about Diebuster today. It is the sequel to Gunbuster. If you haven't listened to our Gunbuster episode, I would recommend listening to that first, but it's not like this depends on that episode. So it came out in 2004. It was like Gunbuster. It was for the anniversary of their studio. This one was not directed by Hideaki Anno, unfortunately, and I think we both agree that that's one of the major weaknesses of it.
Yeah, you can tell. You can really tell that Hideaki Anno was fairly removed from this.
Yeah, you know what's weird though? I just looked up the director. It's Kazuya Tsurumaki, and his directorial stuff is the like Evangelion sequel stuff. So like 1.0, 2.0, 3.0.
Okay. He also directed FL like Fooly Cooly. What the fuck?
Interesting. And it looks like he's involved in the original Evangelion too. Huh.
It feels weird because I love Fooly Cooly.
Oh, okay, he's the art
amazing,
director,
right? Yeah.
Okay.
This definitely feels like a weak debut from someone who's made stuff that's as good as it is. You know, I haven't seen the Eva rebuilds, but yeah, like Fooly Cooly is absolutely incredible, and the art in Eva obviously is absolutely stunning.
All right, so yeah, Diebuster, 2004 anniversary, etc. It's the same structure as Gunbuster. It has 6 episodes, so it's a really easy watch if you're curious about it at all. I would definitely recommend watching it. I think we both agree that it's not quite as good as Gunbuster, so Gunbuster you absolutely should watch. Diebuster, if you have 3 hours, it doesn't hurt to watch,
It is one. I will say this. It was dense enough or convoluted enough that there was no way I could have watched it in one sitting. Like I had to split it up over 3 days to just like process it and stuff like that. But
Right.
I don't feel like I wasted my time with it.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's really cool action. It's really spectacular visuals. But you will be very confused about the story, for sure. Abdul and I still don't really get what happened in the show, I think.
Not at all. I wish I understood what happened. Like, I want to understand it way more than I actually do. At some point, it may warrant a rewatch, maybe in a year or two before Aim for the Top 3 comes out. But, I mean, like, if we want to kick off the discussion, the one thing I will say is that Gunbuster had such a fucking phenomenal opening where it was like the training montage at the high school and the robots were doing like cheer practice, and this had none of that, right? Like it was a way more subdued and I think a little more of like an obvious opening.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is like when we think of 80s movies, training montages and like gym clothes and that kind of stuff, like that comes to mind as like a thing from the 80s. But if you think of like a movie from the 2000s, what do you think of?
I think of like Training Day. I think of I think of like that like whole genre of like mediocre crime cinema that came out during the early 2000s, and like historical epics. Like I think of like Gladiator, Troy, Alexander, Training Day, shit like that, like SWAT. Maybe
for me,
all
I can think of is like anti-terrorism movies.
Okay,
that's the only thing that really comes to mind.
Like Rendition and stuff like that.
And like Hurt Locker and like 24. Like if I think of the 2000s, I think of like 24 style action stuff.
For some reason in my head, those are planted as like late 2000s, which I guess is still 2000s. I mean, I was thinking like 2001 to 2005-ish, but no, that definitely reads, because that's like all there was on TV for a while was how are we going to stop the suicide bomber from blowing up the thing, right?
Yeah. And I definitely watched it for a really long time before I noticed that it was like just propaganda,
I mean, I still love 24 on its like merits as a TV show, especially those first couple of seasons are really like gripping and it's very inventive for what it was. I'll actually something funny about Kiefer Sutherland. He is the grandson of the one of Canada's like socialist heroes, the first guy who
Really?
introduced healthcare. Yeah, like Tommy Douglas was the premier of Saskatchewan, and he was the guy who created universal healthcare in Saskatchewan, which was the first like universal healthcare system in North America, and eventually led to the creation of like Medicare in Canada and a bunch of other places. He's was also the founder of like our really shitty left wing quasi social democratic left wing party, right? Like our third party in parliament. And it's really weird to like think that like, you know, Kiefer Sutherland, who was in the most like jingoistic like bullshit, arguably like incredibly racist TV show, is the grandson of like, yeah, this like pastor who wrote books on eugenics, you know, it was the 60s, and thought everyone should have health care.
That is really weird. So I was just thinking, like, one of the things that allowed Gunbuster to use all those 80s tropes is that it did come out in 88 to 89. So it was right at the end of the 80s. But this came out in 2004, so, like, the 2000s didn't really have a solid identity yet. So I think maybe that's part of the reason why it didn't have, like, any 2000s tropes. Because another thing I was thinking of, like, a trope of the 2000s is, like, really overwrought, convoluted plots, like Lost, the TV show.
Yes.
Which came out the same year as Diebuster did. So maybe that's the 2000s thing that it did, is just having a really overwrought, convoluted plot that doesn't make any sense.
It actually, like, I just Googled, like, best 2000s anime, and I'm looking at the ones I've seen, and stuff like, you know, Paranoia Agent.
Yeah.
And stuff like that, like, aren't actually sort of, it's a lot of animes with really dense, plots that I think, like, both, like, globally, people's like attitudes towards entertainment were shifting, but they hadn't like coalesced yet. Like, Lost was a revolutionary show because it was different. If you watch it now, it's not very good, but it was so much of like, what is a mystery? How many subplots and like relationships can you build? It was very different from like the procedural quality of television at that time, right? And I don't know if that was reflected in Japan, but from like looking at what came out around that time, same year and stuff like that, it feels like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Evangelion actually had some influence on that, because it did have a really complex plot, and a lot of people tried to copy that after Evangelion came out, which was 1999. Was it 99 or was it 94? God damn. I'm having to look up way too much stuff.
It earned it, though. Like,
1995. Okay. It did. Yeah. And that was, you know, part of the talent of Hideaki Anno, I think. But I did remember there is one 2000s anime era thing that the show did really get into, which is moe culture. So that was like a super popular thing at that time, and it's basically like the academic definition is referring to feelings of strong affection mainly towards female characters in anime, manga, and video games and other media directed at the otaku market. So it's like really cute characters that you like have like a weird parasocial type relationship with. And
which this definitely tries to do. Like, that was one of the things. I watched this with Megan, and she pointed out that like it was moe as fuck, and like that made the fan service in it like a little more uncomfortable than it was in like Gunbuster, which the kids are in high school, but they're effectively presented as like full-fledged adults for all intents and purposes, right? Whereas in this one, there's definitely like a sort of like slightly like lolly thing going on with the main character. I don't know if you agree, but
yeah, because she's actually childish.
Yeah, like stupid childish too.
Yeah, and like I think it's funny and cute when she is acting childish, but when you combine it with the fan service stuff, it is pretty uncomfortable.
one positive I will say, because I don't want to get too hard on Diebuster, I still really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It has a really enjoyable opening. Like the anime opening for that series is extremely stylish, extremely well done. I didn't skip it
I love the
once,
song.
Yeah, the song and the style of her like walking through the different situations and stuff like that, and just like the way it's animated is so fucking good. And yeah, the song slaps. It's been added to my rotation.
Yeah, I was trying to come up with a top 5 anime OP list the other day, and totally forgot about that one, and it would definitely break the top 5 now. My
so
number
good.
one at this point though might be the dot hack sign OP. It's really, really fucking good. That's, I think, one of the best parts of the show is the music. But anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I actually don't have many notes on the first episode, but it's a pretty straightforward episode. Nono wants to become a space pilot. She talks to these old men who are supposedly space pilots. They're basically stealing valor from the topless, who are the ace space pilots of the time. And they tell her, like, oh, it's impossible. You have to go through, like, what was it, like 7 or 8 years of school, and then you get to space, and then from there you have to do a bunch more years of school.
A training ship or whatever for another 5 years.
Yeah, and then even if you make it past that, you'll just be on, like, some, piece of shit, like, not cool, in some not cool type of job, I guess. Just trying to discourage her. And it turns out that there is a real topless in the bar, and they get attacked by something. It's
like a giant Martian bug.
Yeah, one of the space monster type things that it's not supposed to be there, basically. And they get saved by Lauk, who is one of the 2 main characters, and she is the first topless who's actually there. That was a really cool sequence, I think. I really liked how her Buster machine like materialized out of nowhere around her. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, like the biggest immediate difference for me in this series was the fact that the Buster machines are like significantly more anthropomorphized and stuff like that. Like it's very shades of Eva, but not. It doesn't go to as far as like Eva did with it. But like, I liked how you could see their personalities. It felt very like Pacific Rim-ish, where each one had its like has its like very defined like archetype, and you can like see within that, and like their interactions with them are really cool. Like I wish they had explored that more actually throughout the show, because at a certain point that part becomes background noise.
Yeah, they really get into it in episode 3, and then it does kind of fall by the wayside a little bit.
And then it turns out that she's some sort of robot, which is again
right.
Yeah, no is like a very out of nowhere twist in that sequence as well. Do we like this is the part where I get confused. We never saw her creation as a robot, right? Or did I just blank out? Okay.
Yeah, that's the kind of weird thing. She just kind of comes out of nowhere. Like in the original Gunbuster, we like see the origin of what's her name?
In this series, she's just referred to as No Riri.
Noriko.
Noriko,
yeah,
yes.
like we see like the very beginning of Noriko, where it's like a picture of her with her dad when she's a baby, and then she goes into the like academy, and it's like, okay, that makes sense as an origin, but in Diebuster, we don't really get much of an origin for Nono. She comes out of like just this wooden building, and then walks into town, and it's not really clear. Like, I guess the thing is, it's like there's no clear direction for like what she's doing at first, other than like, oh, I guess she wants to go into space because she's talking about that. But,
and it is such a different opening than Gunbuster, and it's nice that it's like, oh, this really piques your interest. You know, it's not going to be a remake of Diebuster, right?
Yeah.
And the first episode is definitely the most comprehensible,
Yeah.
aside from the twist. But there's something about it, that it feels different. Like, it feels different, and I'm not sure it's like in a good way. But I like, and especially with like Gunbuster, like you see so much of that world, and you have a very keen understanding of how that world functions. Right? It's very militaristic. There's sort of one enemy. You have to destroy that enemy. Everyone is working in service of destroying that enemy. Whereas in this one, like, it's very abstracted. Like, this idea of how does a society function? Is it moneyless? Why are they just guarding, a fence on Mars, and stuff like that? Like, there's a bunch in there that,
Yeah, they really
I
have to
feel like
add
yeah.
layers to the world building as the series goes on, because yeah, in Gunbuster it's like, okay, it's Earth. Like, this makes sense. They have a little bit of a presence in space, whereas this one, you get 3 or 4 episodes in and it's like, oh wow, there's like a whole civilization on like Jupiter's moons and on Pluto, and apparently like we're just everywhere in space right now. But also there's somehow like a whole space monster planet like just beyond the orbit of Pluto.
And comprehensively, like, the way it even like peels the onion off of like the different monsters and the sort of military function of society is really obtuse relative to how it was in Gunbuster. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like the lack of like a main threat for a majority of the first little bit of this series is what makes it one of the more like difficult things to follow.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's the main thing, is like the goal of getting into the military to fight space monsters in Gunbuster is very clear, but like the goal of Nono getting into the Space Force thing or whatever is less clear. I guess her motivation isn't very clear. It seems just like she just wants to be in space and that's it.
She wants to be like No Riri, which is like, I
Yeah.
believe, by the end of the series you find out that's taken place like 10,000 years after
Yeah, it's
um,
like 6 months
Gunbuster.
before the very end of Gunbuster.
Which is absolutely incredible, because it's like society A doesn't seem to have progressed that much, but B, it's amazing that like they have this whole like idea of like legacy within the story, but it's not really explored in a way that I think is super effective. Like, it's a plot twist more than it is like a thematic device.
Uh-huh.
Which, like, have you ever watched Babylon 5?
I haven't, no.
Babylon 5 has this like incredible episode called The Deconstruction of Falling Stars, which is an episode where they look at the legacy of Babylon 5's plot in that world, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, and then a million years in the future.
Okay.
And it's split into 5 segments, each of which is like 15 minutes for each of the eras, and it's such a like beautiful way to like contextualize the things that you have been watching, the things that have happened here have had this impact in shaping humanity's future, right? And it's such a good cap to like what the series is all about. And I feel like if they had actually opened with like telling you who No Riri is and like the place she has in society as a whole and stuff like that, as like a mythic hero figure, as like literally a Jesus coming back to Earth at this point, right? It would have been stronger and like tied into Gunbuster more.
Yeah, because the weird thing is like Nono Riri is just Nono's name for Noriko. No one else knows who she is. But like I kind of figured it out immediately, like, oh, she's talking about Noriko. What she meant. But it's supposed to be presented as like this mystery. There's also this weird bit that they're doing in the first episode. I mean, it's funny, but I don't fully get it. Is Nono just keeps splitting things in half? Like she's working at that bar. She's working at the bar and she like is splitting plates in half constantly while washing them, and she was just eating an apple and it split in half. I don't really get it, but it is kind of a funny visual bit, but it's just weird.
It's hilarious. I think the implication. I think it's supposed to be a setup for the fact that she's revealed as a robot.
Huh.
Like near the end of the episode, because
Yeah.
the last thing she splits is the monster.
Oh, okay.
But at the same time, it's again just a weird way of exploring and entering into that idea.
Yeah. Yeah, another thing that's weird is you were asking about whether the society uses money. They are talking about paying her wages, but she's only making 720 yen an hour, which is 720, like $7.20 in
Listen,
US dollars.
In a free market, in this like post-utopian version of capitalism, deflation will occur. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope that's what it is.
You know,
Because
at a certain
otherwise
point,
she's really getting shafted.
yeah. At a certain point, they were like, they were real Zimbabwe hours. An apple cost 7 trillion yen, and they just pegged the currency to, I don't know, space plutonium or something like that.
Yeah.
And force like deflation to occur, so that everyone.
That's one of the
could,
things I really
buy
liked
bread.
about Trigun. Did you ever watch that show?
Trigun is my favorite anime of all time.
Okay, yeah, I really like that they did everything in double dollars, and it was like just really ridiculous amounts. Because that's
What was
very
it? Vash the
believable.
Stampede, the $600 trillion man or whatever.
Yeah, double dollar.
Yeah. It's Trigun works so well because I think it was one of the first animes I watched, which is probably why it's one of my favorites of all time. But like, its balancing of like tone is really what works, right? Like it has a really funny, really engaging, really charming like main relationship, and its protagonist is great. But like the series where spoilers, where the episode where like Wolfwood dies is even now, like watching it now, is really affecting and really sad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also just Wolfwood as a character and Vash as a character are fucking cool as hell. You know what I mean? That cross gun
Right.
is so fucking good. We need more cross guns in society.
Okay, so let's move on to episode 2, since I think we just are confusing ourselves even more by talking about episode 1.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's only going to get worse from here. So like,
Yeah,
buckle in,
yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
So episode 2 is like a fairly straightforward conflict. Like it introduces the reintroduces the space monsters. The military tries to fight them and gets owned like really bad immediately. Which I think kind of like counteracts the whole hard work and guts message from Gunbuster, because the military like has been working really hard at trying to become powerful, and they have like huge amounts of confidence, way too much confidence, but then they just get owned so badly by the space monsters in like a really comedic way, and just have to get saved by these like hereditary like topless people, like people with hereditary power. That was actually something I saw in some of the reviews where people were saying that they do kind of undermine the message of the original Gunbuster with the way the topless worked, which now that I think about it, I kind of agree with.
I think the show as a whole does like undercut the topless at a certain point. Is like, the hereditary power.
That's true.
Isn't actually that great at challenging the monsters. You might be able to answer this question for me. These space monsters are different than the space monsters in Gunbuster, right? Like I'm not going crazy here.
I think they're supposed to be like an evolution of them. I mean, the whole thing in Gunbuster was they destroyed all of the space monsters at the end.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, yeah.
But I think what happened, because they're called fluctuating gravity wells, I think what happened is the monsters just got crushed into black holes, and then they evolved into being black holes, like living black holes. Because that is like the type of monster they deal with the most in here. But there are also different ones. So I think there's like 2 different groups.
Okay, that's actually kind of cool as hell.
But then again, there's that part where they're going to meet with the space monsters, and then the giant fluctuating gravity well comes out from the 10th planet. So maybe they are all the same. I think they are all the same.
Yeah, that part confused me because that's the part that really undercuts the original Gunbuster for me. Is like I wish they had come up with some sort of new threat to articulate rather than like just saying that everything that Noriko did in Gunbuster was sort of rendered useless.
Yeah.
All that said, Gravity Well monster's super cool. I loved the degeneracy talk throughout the series.
Yeah.
If we destroy the black hole, it'll create a degeneracy cascade, which is, again, so funny.
Degeneracy cascade. Hey, what are you talking about? All the fan service in this show?
Which this episode had a fucking stupid amount of, by the way. Yeah, it's horny as hell. This series is hornier than Gunbuster somehow.
It is. It really is. Yeah, especially like the Nono's balloon skirt that she's wearing that just constant panty flashes. Did not really like that. My favorite thing from episode 2 though was the dog-shaped spacesuit, which is like the cutest thing I've ever seen, possibly.
Those were nice. Like it's so like dissonant with the fan service too. Which I guess is like a very Moe thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Like but the suits on their own are hilarious and cute and extremely funny.
Yeah, they're great. Go ahead.
Oh no! What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say one like interesting bit of characterization that they did. I didn't really think about it too hard, but maybe there is something like deeper about it. Is Lauk has like this thing about listening to heartbeats, like it calms her down.
Yeah, it's a very like warm piece of character development, and also we don't get a ton of that throughout the series, but stuff like that does help, I think, the series as a whole in terms of just like fleshing out the characters, making you more interested in them. Like, I wanted to learn more about, I think, every other character except for our main one, like their inner lives and like what led them to this point and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the most well done character is Taiko, because we do see some of her past and find out like what's motivating her, and she has like a nice what word am I thinking of? Not resolution, but like
arc.
Yeah.
Taiko was cool as hell.
Yeah. I still think that is the best episode.
And like there's stuff in there that speaks to, again, the way the world has changed. Like the Serpentine Sisters and stuff like that are really cool elements that are, perpetually added throughout the show and like explored a little bit, but nowhere near as much as they like should be.
Yeah.
I do think episode 2 was the one where episode 1 was pretty watchable and I really enjoyed it. Episode 2 was where I was like, okay, this is not, I just have to accept this isn't going to be as good as Gunbuster, both in terms of its like thematics and both in terms of its like ideas and especially its characters. But like, that moment we were talking about with Gunbuster when Noriko's like crush like dies in that space battle and she goes to mourn with the like other engineers or whatever, or the other pilots, and they just look at her and she leaves, and it's such a fucking good moment. There's no moment in this series that sort of reaches, I think, a level close to that, right, where it's just like perfect visual storytelling, perfectly earned and stuff like that. But I mean, Diebuster is fun. It's a lot of fun to watch, even if you have no idea what the fuck is going on.
Yeah, I will disagree with you on that one. I think the moment where Taiko gets the new Buster machine and is like it was actually one of the few good uses of nudity, where she's like nude floating in space and is remembering this boy from her past, and kind of like coming to the realization that she has to stop letting it define her life and kind of become her own person.
Right.
I think that was a really well done moment.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, that
just
was
generally, I think
was
episode
nice.
3 is really good. and the peak of the series to me.
It's funny because like we're both Gunbuster and Diebuster are 6 episodes, but the whole time I was watching this, I was like, man, they should have made this as long as Gunbuster. Like it could have used like 2 episodes to space everything out. And then this morning I was like just looking up the show again I was like, fuck, Gunbuster was 6 episodes. You know what I mean? Like it felt like it fit within that framework really well. But like episode 3, I agree with you, is the high point of the series, but it also could have been 2 episodes and I think functioned like just a whole lot better.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's talk about that. So I actually just put it on because I don't know, I just want to rewatch
it. Slaps.
it.
Yeah, it's very great. Good. Yeah.
So like right when the episode starts, we see Tycho, who I missed who it was the first time I watched the show. It's the girl with the pigtails. So she like jumps into combat like when she's not supposed to, because she wants to set the record of confirmed kills, I guess. And there's like some ceremonial privilege that you get from that she actually, like when the subject comes up, she's talking badly about it, like, oh, it's just, you just read a prepared statement, it's not really a big deal. But she also, I think, just wants to feel like she's better than Lauk, who is always the person who gets to to be in that ceremony. And right away we see, like, after she jumps in, her earring comes off and she grabs it, and while she's distracted by it, her mech gets destroyed, which we find out why that is later, and I think that's like a well done piece of characterization. So it turns out later that the earrings were made by that boy from her past who had space radiation syndrome, just like Coach from Gunbuster. And she became a topless while the boy was still alive and thought she would be able to heal his radiation sickness. But he ended up dying anyway. And so that's kind of just like eaten at her for her entire life. And the earrings that I mentioned were made by the boy. I don't know if I said that already. And I think it's really well done as a symbol through the whole episode. A kid steals it while she's changing, and she runs after them, and it's like these like gutter kids who ask her to make it snow on Titan, which I thought was a fun plot detail. And then later in the episode, she like kind of gets fed up with everything and throws the earrings away. And then later on in the episode, Nono brings them back for her, and that's kind of when she has her, is it apotheosis? Is that the right term? I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I think it's a really great story arc. Her first mech gets destroyed, so it's like her initial fall, and then she comes back in this new Buster machine that they just created. It's Contravant D's Neuf.
Yes,
90.
Which if I was an actual Canadian, I would know what that meant, but I don't know French.
Yeah, they do have one of the weirdest numeral systems. So it's 420
plus 10. Yeah.
So that 90 is the Buster machine, and so she actually is able to make it snow with her new Buster machine because it has this like tennis attack. Like it
Which
hits
absolutely
an energy
rules,
ball with
by
a
the
tennis
way.
racket. Sorry, what
Yeah,
was that?
that part actually rules. Like the
Yeah,
again, like especially with the way they like anthropomorphize the Buster machines in this one,
yeah,
like one with like a fucking tennis racket is extremely hilarious. Like Rocket Cape is
yeah,
extremely good. You know what I
yep,
mean? Those like touches are really what make the series stand out for me because it's just really clever and like really inventive design for like the way the mechs work. It's like very much better than like, oh, it's now pulling out a giant gun, right?
yeah, yeah. I did like the tennis racket thing, and yeah, so that she, she does her tennis serve, her Serena Williams serve, and it it has a theorized effect of uh like shooting a beam that's like was it negative 10 trillion 20 million degrees or something like that, and they're like, that's not even
Yes,
physically possible.
it's like these temperatures are not scientifically possible, so we have no idea what will happen.
Yeah, and so what happens is it like freezes everything and makes it snow on Titan, which is a nice resolution there. um yeah, I mean, overall I think she's I think the best done character in the show. I kind of wish that she was had a more prominent role, because she kind of becomes a minor character again after this episode.
The if they had made her a more prominent character instead of Lalk, I think it would have been like just generally a more engaging show overall because like
Yeah.
they're like her and Nono's plots like they work really well together and like especially as like inversions of each other and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And they're both looking for something like one's looking at something far back in the past that they feel like they have an emotional attachment to, one's looking at something in their immediate past, and stuff like that. Like there's a way you could have explored that in the way that both these people think that like achieving the same goal of becoming the best topless or the best pilot will help them get that thing that they need, right? Whereas with Lalk, like her motivations are pretty like diaphanous throughout the show, except for the fact that she wants to be the best, right?
Yeah, I think that speaks to how character archetypes can actually be very effective in making a story better. Where, like, you might think it's like a crutch to lean on, sort of, but the fact that God, what's her name? The other main woman from Amano from Gunbuster. The fact that she's like,
Oni-sama is how I remember her. Yeah.
yeah, the fact that she's like the class rep, like top student thing, like it makes her motivations very clear. Whereas in this one, Nono's like, I don't know, she's not really an archetype. She's like a weird goofball. Um, I can't think of an archetype that relates to her. And then same with Lauk. She doesn't fit a neat archetype, and so it makes it harder to read what her motivations and concerns are. Um, but
And
Tycho, I
like
think,
I
is
mean,
is clearer.
archetypes exist for a reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they give you something measurable to like just immediately identify, especially in a series this short.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
also like Gunbuster did a really good job exploring and inverting and like iterating on the archetypes they present in episode 1, right? Like the way the characters change by the end, um they become the opposite of what they were at the beginning.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're like Oni-sama or whatever her actual name is.
Amano.
Amano, yeah. Amano. Yeah, this is me becoming a weeb. You know what I mean? Like yeah, Amano is the like scared, timid one, right? And
Yes.
Noriko is the one who's like pushing her to be like, no, we must do this and stuff like that, right? And those
Uh-huh.
transformations are a very natural occurrence. And like in this one, there is degrees of transformation, but it's sort of I agree, it sort of like stops mostly at episode 3 with Tycho, as opposed to Gunbuster, where it was like a very clear through line for all of the characters. Like
Hmm.
a lot of this is just Nono discovering higher degrees of power she didn't know she had.
Yes.
Like every episode is potentially you could just call it like a Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm trying to see if this came out. Okay, this actually came out before Gurren Lagann, which is surprising because it has a lot of the same style, like in general, and of like storytelling. Because have you seen that show?
Lagann, I've seen like a little bit of it, but like of that like sect of like Fooly Cooly Gurren Lagann, I've only seen Fooly Cooly to its like start to finish.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so it has the same kind of like bigger, stronger type progression. And they even have like a very similar style. Diebuster, Lauk's Buster Machine looks pretty similar to the main character in Gurren Lagann. Like he has the cool anime long coat that flaps in the wind sort of thing.
So fucking cool, by the way.
Yeah,
so fucking lit. Yeah,
it is really cool. Yeah, I think that is like the strongest point in the show is like the mecha designs have improved substantially. They also, I will say one thing they do really well in this is their visual gags. Well, just their gags in general are great. Like I was thinking earlier that Nono actually kind of reminds me of Bugs Bunny.
Yeah. Oh,
like,
yeah. Like the slapstick.
There's one part where she's in the background and she's like floating in a space station and she's like flapping her feet like, and it's like sending her up and she's like flipping over. And I was just thinking like that's something that Bugs Bunny would do for sure.
Yeah, like the visual storytelling of this in terms of like the way the gags are played out, the mecha design, the moments where it is like a lot of the series is wall-to-wall dialogue, which made it like, which I think also makes it difficult to follow because like you can blink and miss one line and then not know what's going on for the next like 5 to 10 minutes.
That happened to me so many times on my first watch through.
Yeah, like I would check my notifications for like 10 seconds and then go back to the series and I'd be like, the fuck just happened? As I was watching
it's like, who are these twins? Like, what are they eating?
But like that's also like a very Gainax thing, right? Where it's like really good visual humor, really good just like gags, and like obviously like the animation. Isn't Gurren Lagann like a comedy? Isn't it like a satire?
It has comedy elements.
Okay.
Another really great gag is in episode 3 is Cadrevant D's when the machine is shipped into the space station, it's in like a big plastic container like you would get an action figure with like a bunch of accessories. Like all of its parts are like in their own little space in like a plastic container. And there's like stars, like star stickers on the top of the plastic. It's really funny looking. And then another joke, I think it's in episode 4. Probably my favorite one is this is just like a little world building thing. They're showing like this space traffic, and so there's like all these lanes of traffic, and someone is on the radio saying like, because of a multiple vehicle pileup, traffic is currently backed up for 680,000 kilometers.
It's moments like that sell you on the world too, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a really just like neat and fun way to like get you more into like the world building of the series, which I would argue that the series' biggest weakness is the obtuse world building, but stuff like that sort of kept me in it as we were going through it.
Yeah, it's good and bad. Like they do a lot of good world building things. Like one of the moments that I liked for in terms of world building was when they take a picture of all of the topless and they're like, wow, this is the first time that we've all been together in like so many years. And that kind of makes it feel like they thought about that as an element of the world. How
like the time dilation stuff?
Yeah, and just the fact that there's like all these topless, but they're all doing their own thing most of the time. And then there was that character, the otaku guy, who he was kind of like an exile from them. I don't remember why exactly, but
I don't remember his plot at all, I'll be honest. It's,
it wasn't memorable, but they tried.
Yeah, I mean, like his plot was one of those things you could have cut out to help space out like the everything else in the series and stuff like that. Because
True.
like until you mentioned him, I forgot he was in the series. um, which I should really watch this twice is what I should have done.
I've watched it like
it's
3 or
just-
4
it's a
times,
lot.
and it doesn't help. It doesn't help a ton. It's still very confusing,
Okay.
but it is fun.
Epis. Yeah, I like. Despite I know we're like ragging on it a lot, but despite all that, like I'm still like I still enjoyed it. I still really
Yeah.
like thought it was like a fun series. I didn't feel like my time was wasted at all. Like the animation in particular is like such a fucking great high point of what it is, and the
Yes.
design of the world and stuff like that. And then you have stuff like I don't know the Serpentine twins, which are absolutely like such a neat element or whatever.
Yeah, they are some of the creepiest characters I've seen in any anime.
And they're what the oldest living topless, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and that stuff like that is really interesting because there's this idea within the series that that you age out of being a topless, right? Mm-hmm. And just to see the effect that's like had on them, at being like as old as they are, and still have that like, is it psychic energy?
It's like they're eating some sort of meat of, I think it's of a fluctuating gravity well that's like supposed to be dormant,
Right.
but then it comes to life in episode 4.
Diebuster, 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 Diebuster.
So yeah, they introduced the Serpentine twins in this one, and that the one dude, this is another issue. I can't remember any of the characters' names. The topless guy who like tried to rape Noriko at one point, or no, at one point.
Oh fuck.
I think he's about to age out of being a topless, and so he's partaking in the same meat as the Serpentine twins, which he finds out what it is later and is like really revolted. And this is also when Nono finds out she's like a super powerful buster machine, right?
I love that they still made the like meat of the space monster look like classic anime food. Like it,
Yeah.
it looks like a delicious steak. Like it looks like a nice like filet mignon.
Yeah. But it's like also like on fire or something like that.
Yeah. And like on the table, which is inexplicably shaped like a heart, there's just this like big ass roast of fucking a space monster on it. Which is very funny because you know that in the world some guy got an assignment being like, yeah, you're going to the space monster, you're going to carve out some of it, and then you're going to give it to a chef who's going to cook it up and feed it to these like demon children. And like that scene in general, like when they're showing you the like excavation and research on the fucking space monsters and stuff like that is super cool. Like they've built this whole industry around like studying and carving out and like taking bits out of the monster, and it's like very grim but like also very industrial. Like it's very believable in terms of like what humans would do if we found a giant monster in space that's supposed to be dead.
Yeah, they had the same sort of thing in Pacific Rim. There was like a whole industry
Yes.
around using the parts of the monsters, the kaiju.
Which is great. Like it's again one of those like very neat touches in world building. I'm sure that like I know that Pacific Rim draws a lot of inspiration from like Eva, but in a lot of ways it feels like it draws even more inspiration from the Buster series. Like
Yeah.
Gunbuster and Diebuster gave me Pacific Rim vibes, especially Diebuster, which had those like, you know, not archetypal, but like very specific kind of mecha anime and stuff like that, right? Like
Yeah.
But yeah, no, episode 4 I think is so good in terms of like a moment to moment basis, but as a whole is very difficult to like A, keep up with, B, like by the time you got to episode 4 of Gunbuster, you sort of knew where it was going in terms of an ending. And in this one I felt slightly lost by the time it was over.
Yeah, I mean, episode 4 of Gunbuster was like, it felt like the show could have concluded there. That was like the thing about like what you were saying earlier, where you're like, wow, it's only 6 episodes, because um in episode 5 of Gunbuster, that's like after they've beaten the first major space monster swarm and returned to Earth.
Right.
And you're like, wow, like what else is there going to be in the show? Like they've already beaten the big space monster swarm, whereas in Diebuster episode 4 is like kind of just the beginning of the major conflict. Like I feel like the swarms that they were fighting in episode 3 kind of felt like that was just like an everyday occurrence sort of thing. Like just like it's like a militarized border situation.
This like fucking DMZ with people,
Yeah.
creatures you can't really speak to.
Yes, exactly. Because I mean they had that weird like net grid thing, like laser grid, that the all those little robots, like the 3 robots in the first episode, are, I guess they're just like a standard type of space robot. And so they're building this big like laser grid thing that just felt like, they're doing like everyday sort of work.
The design of those robots too are extremely good. Like I love that
Yeah.
like very boxy. It's very like a weapon to surpass Metal Gear design.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's so cool, and like feels like that's the part that feels like we're like 20 years away from it, just like a giant World War I box tank but on legs.
Yeah. I guess another thing about episode 4 that like one of the reasons it's really confusing, like not only the dialogue that just goes at a million miles an hour, but also it's jumping around to all these different places, like all throughout the galaxy. Like right now I'm watching
Yeah.
it, and they're cutting from like Earth to like Pluto to Titan to like all these random spots in space where there's like, these military areas, to like space stations. And it's just hard to follow, like, why are they showing me all these places? Like, what's going on exactly? They randomly cut to the space monster that they're like harvesting the meat from, which is cool. They like have this like robot arm with like a laser on it that's like cutting meat from it.
And that's one of the things with Gunbuster, is that Gunbuster has extremely good mecha shit, but it's like
Yeah.
the mecha shit is so much of like it takes such a backseat to everything else in the series, which is like the character, the story, the world, and most of it takes place on one ship. Like 4 episodes of that series are essentially just on the spaceship, right?
Yes.
Whereas this, it's like I appreciate what they tried to do, which was like combine the like fold the mecha into the story in like a far more deeper way. I'm just not sure if it worked out the way they intended it to.
Yeah, they definitely introduced some really cool elements, like the idea that the mecha are they're alive, they have minds, and a big part of their power is like the experience that they accumulate. Because the otaku guy at one point is talking about how Diebuster has like more experience than almost any other machine, and he has like this like head injury, but if he were to repair the head injury, he would like it would basically be like brain damage, and so he would lose all this accumulated experience, and so they just sort of like leave it there, and that's like a setup for something at the very end when they actually like take that part out and there's like an actual cockpit in there.
Right.
I thought that was really cool. Also, the cockpit designs in these mecha are really fucking cool. I think it's like the coolest cockpit design of any show I've ever seen.
It's
The like
it's
bike
extremely
seat sort
neat.
of thing.
Yeah. In this like circular cage, right?
Yeah, they're like they have a circular like ring thing around them, and then like just a big like spherical display all around them. So it looks like they're out in the middle of space, like sitting on this like weird bike seat thing.
Yeah, no, the design of it, and it, like, looking at the director's body of work makes so much sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was an art director on Eva or whatever, and a bunch of other stuff, and it's like, it it is really well thought out when that's like taking center stage.
Yeah.
Um, I would love to see of all, I think, a lot of animes, I would love to see this remade. I would be really interested to see like if like what sort of lessons they take and what sort of things they keep in like an OVA update of this or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe like put Kazuya on like art direction because he's obviously really good at that. And maybe get someone else to direct it and
Have
like
you seen the
rewrite some of the story. That I think that would
Have
make
you
it.
seen the movie version of this?
Of what?
Apparently, this was compiled into a movie, like,
Huh.
as I guess OVAs are sometimes. And I'd be interested to see if it works better as a movie than as a series. Like in one go, cut out a lot of the stuff in like 2.5 hours long. Okay, at least according to a Wikipedia article.
Huh. Yeah, I definitely missed that. Yeah, compilation movie condenses Gunbuster and Diebuster into 2 feature-length movies. That is really interesting. I will have to check that out.
I would never watch Gunbuster as a movie, I don't think, just because I love the series so much. But this one I would definitely give a shot as a movie.
Yeah, for sure. It could make it more or less confusing. Could go either way.
I think the one sitting with this would actually be a lot more comprehensible. But maybe that's just me. 'Cause like, yeah, it was a tough follow, but again, not terrible.
Yeah, I think if they cut a lot of stuff, then it could make it way less confusing too.
Right.
I think I sort of agree with you about the otaku guy. Like they probably could have cut him, and a lot of stuff would have been less confusing. But then again, I don't know because, like when Nono becomes Buster Machine 7, she's with him and is on like Pluto, and then like warps to Titan, and that probably would be more confusing.
Do you know
But, yeah.
if Gainax animates on ones or twos? Like, do you know if they're running 24 frames a second or like 16 or 12 frames a second?
I have no idea. Sorry.
Okay, it's like in animation, especially like hand drawn animation. There's like 2 ways you can animate. You can animate on ones, which is every frame is a different animation cell, which is like very smooth and crisp, and like, or to save time and money, you can animate on twos, where a single second is 12 frames instead of 24, which is like a lot more jittery.
Yeah.
And there's points in this that feel like smooth as hell and just like really slick and clean to watch, but other parts where it feels like they were trying to save money or speed things through. They didn't do the Hideaki Anno thing of having the last episode be a sketchbook.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, was good and bad. But like,
I think that was one of the more memorable parts of Gunbuster.
Yeah, I remember we were talking about Gunbuster, and I was like, I thought it was just an intentional thing he did.
Yeah.
I didn't realize he just
Nobody could tell
money.
because I remember looking that up and nobody knew whether it was intentional or not. But it is a very Anno thing.
And they try.
I don't know.
To do
Maybe
the
with
Anno thing.
CG technology, they have the ability to do both, like ones and twos.
Right. And yeah, like, I guess if you're animating CGI at 24 frames, everything else has to sort of speed up to match.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, like, even in episode 5, like, they finally have a scene with bureaucrats, which is rad. I love bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And especially, like, looking at Japanese explorations of bureaucracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, like, it's such... I know from my experiences in Japan, it is like such a process-driven society, right? Like, the process of ordering food, for example, is like, you take your things, you put them on the table, the cashier takes the food off the table, and then hands you a tray, and then you put your money in the tray and slide the tray back, and then they take out the money, they count the money so that you can see they're giving you the exact change. They put that back in the tray, they hand it back to you, you pull the money out of the tray, you push the tray back, then you walk down the line where someone will individually bag everything for you, and then they hand you the bag, right? Like, it's bureaucracy is like a very, like, I think core function of just like societal norms in Japan, and it's really goes down to like a base level. So like always seeing bureaucrats arguing over things is very nice. You know what I mean? Like it's very interesting to see like how far they go with like a critique of what in a lot of ways is something intrinsic to like the polite function of society in Japan, right?
Yeah, it also seemed like everything the bureaucrats said was like extremely wrong. Was that just me?
Yes. No,
'Cause, like-
it is like very Hideaki Anno. I know it's not Hideaki Anno, but it's like
Yeah.
very much his style of critique of like Japanese bureaucracy.
Yeah, because they're meeting the space monsters to like they're going to the 11th planet, and they're like, oh, you know, Nono is controlling all of these space monsters, and they have Lauk in the cockpit with him, and they're like, oh, she probably invited you so that she could demonstrate her power to you. Like, no, that is definitely not the reason.
And yeah, like I do like that about, I think, well, like both of the Buster series and Eva and especially Shin Godzilla have this like abject contempt for bureaucratic process, which is really nice. Like it both speaks to like my politics, but also speaks to just like a very interesting and usually like unobserved critique of like societal function, right?
Yeah.
Which is really cool. Like I don't know if you ever watched the movie Shoplifters.
No.
I'm trying to remember the director of that movie. Koreeda, I think. It's a film about a homeless family in Tokyo who take in another homeless child who's being abused by her. Yeah, Hirokazu Koreeda, who's being abused by her parents, right? And like a big part of the film functions on like child services in Japan, stuff like that, right? And a lot of what they're
Okay.
allowed to get away with, or a lot of how they get away with their like grifts and stuff like that, and like keep the family unit together, is by exploiting the slow and oftentimes like counterintuitive bureaucratic process.
Nice.
And it's like it was like a big thing within the movie that's like very like again like rarely if ever see that, right? I think that's one of the reasons Shin Godzilla was so well received too, because it was just like, you know, the whole thesis of that film is like Fukushima happened because bureaucrats were arguing about process before. It's like I got an urgent email from my IWW branch today, and I opened it, and the urgent email was there's been a revision to Robert's Rules of Order. Yeah, and like the one thing I will say about Diebuster as well, far fewer Soviets.
Yeah, that's a really disappointing part of it. Gunbuster already has Soviets in the future. So the fact that the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 or whatever, I think they should have just stuck with being like an alternate timeline where the Soviet Union lasted until, you know, we went into space and everything. Especially since like the entire society seems to be like this weird, like giant version of Japan.
Yeah.
Because they have like when Lauk is talking about using Earth as a weapon against the giant fluctuating gravity well, she meets up with these like sort of like elders in like a Japanese style house where they like make her matcha, and they're, you know, sitting seiza and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I don't know, like that part of the society is kind of weird, that it's just like Japan but through the whole galaxy. And yeah, I do wish there were Soviets. That would have been awesome.
It would be cool because we jump around so much, you know, if each planet or something was reflective of a different society, right? Like the idea that the world has been atomized into like individual space empires is like very believable, especially from where we started in Gunbuster, right? I have a hard time believing that there's going to be a unitary, like a completely hegemonic force in the future, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like they just have one single like a unitary state through the whole galaxy. Cuz
And
they're like, "Oh, this is like the military police guy." Not like the military police guy of like this state or like this society. He's just like the guy.
right.
And one thing that they keep mentioning is Condians, which Hermes isn't here, but I know that he would say I read that as Canadian for the first several episodes.
So did I. I 100% did. Every time it came up, I turned to Megan and I'm like, Canadian? I like the idea that in the future there's only two surviving
Japan and Canada.
nations. Japan and Canada. Yeah, they have the summer Olympic Games are extremely boring, but the Winter Games extremely good. Very very well put together, very well established, highly competitive.
Yeah.
Honestly, like that is nation states are bad except when it comes to, or states in general are bad except when it comes to sports, at which point I am like an ardent nationalist. Because I'm a hypocrite and I love sports, but like I do like the idea of it being Canada in there because it is extremely funny.
Yeah. But apparently it's just Kanda.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Yuri on Ice?
No.
Yuri on Ice has probably the best depictions of Canadians in any anime I've seen, which is just the Canadian figure skating team is just the douchiest, most snooty, self-important team.
So they're from Vancouver.
Yeah, they're basically Vancouverites. And they're extremely funny, and it's just like it's a very nice way of seeing Canada represented in that like in I guess media that's not from Canada, right? Because usually media outside Canada depicts Canadians as being like extremely polite, extremely nice, extremely good, not genocidal at all.
Yeah.
Whereas,
the exact image that Canada wants to portray of itself.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Speaking of the early 2000s, I traveled a lot in the early to mid 2000s, a lot of times with my family, and my brother was like doing anti-globalization work sort of all around the place and stuff like that.
Nice.
And we made it very clear. It was made very clear to us that, like, because the Iraq War was happening and stuff like that, you have to have a Canada patch somewhere on your person that's like visible, because especially like traveling to like the Middle East and like places like Morocco and Egypt, and even Europe at that time, right, which largely took a much harder stance against the Iraq War than like Britain did. It actually did make a pretty profound difference in how people treated you. Because if they could identify you were Canadian, they didn't have that baggage of like, oh, you're an American, therefore you must be like this.
Right.
Which is very, very funny. Like, even when I was in Japan, telling a cab driver, in broken English, he's asking where you're from, and in broken Japanese, you're saying, oh, Canada, and people open up very quickly after you say that. But yeah, unfortunately, it's Canada and not Canada in Diebuster.
Yeah, and that's another one of those things where like I never quite got what that was supposed to be. Like I don't really understand what Kandians are supposed to be. I think it's a group of people.
I think so too, but like every Canadian who has like a Canadian inferiority complex about the place they live in, I just got really excited about it almost being Canada and forgot to read the part that explained what they were.
Yeah, there's not even like a wiki page that explains it or anything.
You love to see it. Maybe that's just the future. They just took a vowel out of Canada, and Canada, did some other horrible shit to other people in space or somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah. Like in general, I think that, like, to take it back to episode 5, this is, I think, where I got the most confused, especially like in the last half. Just like everything that happened where they're like going to attack the monsters now, and then the big monster shows up and you're like, what is this big monster? And also, where is this Buster machine coming from?
Yes.
And this is also the episode where we find out that No is a Buster machine, right?
Right.
Buster machine number 7, with no context given as to where she came from.
Yeah, that was. I mean, we were already talking about how we don't really know anything about her origins or anything like we do with Noriko, and I mean, the new Buster machine is 90, and Noriko is 7, which
But also
why
the
isn't
most
it
powerful one.
set? Why is it the only one that's like a number instead of a French numeral? And then yeah, like
maybe
how old is she
it's
then?
French, yeah. And that's the part that makes no fucking sense, like comprehensively. Maybe the Candons took over design of the Buster machines, which is why at a certain point they're all French numerals. But like, yeah,
The only thing I
it's
can
like,
think
okay,
of is
so
like it's a pun off of her name because one of the ways to say 7 in Japanese is Nana.
oh,
and
okay, I
her
guess
name
that
is
makes
Nono.
sense.
Yeah. So maybe that's what it is, but I
she's-
don't know.
She's number 7, but also the most powerful one.
Yeah.
Like by a country mile, is the most effective and powerful Buster ever made.
Yes.
I will say one of the things about this series that frustrated me a little bit is like there's only one real Buster in Gunbuster, right? And that is the titular Gunbuster. It is
Well, there's 1 and 2, and they merge to become Gunbuster.
right, yeah. Buster Machine 1, Buster Machine 2, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like when you get Gunbuster, it's really earned. You know what I mean? Like they spend
Yes.
the whole series, getting up to this point where you break out the Busters, which are like proven to be fragile and like expensive, and you pull them out when you need to pull them out and stuff like that. And there's like a lot of hand wringing in the series about like we're gonna do Gunbuster now, guys. It's the only way out of here, and
Yeah.
it's gonna have treads for some reason. But like in this one, it's just like busters all over the place, right? They're just literally everyone is busting in this series.
So much busting.
Yeah. And that part, frustrated me. But like also it's sort of cut by the fact that the cool fight at the end of the episode 5 is absolutely amazing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, the fights in this are I think are better, which I'm sure is partly a function of the fact that they have CG animation. They can just do more with the same budget, and that is one of the things that saves it is the cool action scenes. But the ending, like the final action scene, I think is definitely not as good. Like the final action scene in, like, was it the final one? Like the one where they actually get into Gunbuster and they're like, doing their thing in Gunbuster was just outstanding. Especially it's like the type of action scene that I like, where everything is just completely over the top. But I feel like when Diebuster comes out in this, it's toned down quite a lot comparatively.
Yeah.
Like Dee's Noof seems like more over the top because he has like the big like Buster beam, and he has like missiles in his arms. He has missiles in his like cool anime coat, and she like takes the coat off and throws it, and it turns into a fucking giant cannon, which is awesome.
Which is so fucking cool. Like that, the cape physics in this are stunning.
Yes.
And also like that weird like eye thing he has on his wrists, which like explodes into like beams of like killer light or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that whole subset of like the series, the way like how creative they get with the mecha is one of its like strongest points. Like you could literally just watch a clip show of all the mecha fights in the series and get a lot out of it because they're just really clever and really funny and really just like spectacularly well done, and the CGI actually looks okay, especially for its era. Like it doesn't feel dated now as much as it could be.
Yeah, I almost wish it was just like 3 hours of robot fights and like no plot.
Hell yeah,
Like,
I would watch that.
because the plot is so convoluted that I don't think it's helping a whole lot. And if it were just like, even if they just did like, 20 minutes of plot through the whole 6 episodes as like a thin excuse to do giant robot fights, I think that would be great. I'm totally fine with thin plots for action sequences, like John Wick. Could have been like that kind of style,
I mean, John Wick. John Wick is great because the world building is great. The plot doesn't exist, but like the action and the world building just support it so well.
Yeah.
And like I think this series tries to find a halfway between, I think, what they thought people wanted at the time and trying to like keep the like semiotics of Gunbuster in there a little bit.
Yeah.
And it sort of meets like a mushy middle position where once again, it proves that centrism doesn't work as well as everyone thinks it should. Like, whereas like, yeah, Gunbuster's way more cerebral, right? And especially at episode 6, which has, I will say, episode 6 has an extremely rewarding payoff I did not see coming. But also, everything leading up to that point it's a lot.
Yeah. You mean episode 6 of Diebuster?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Sometimes it gets confusing when we switch between both.
Yeah. But like, at the end of episode 6, it's shown that this series is actually takes place right before the end of Gunbuster does, when they come back to Earth 10,000 years later, and like they put up the message being like, welcome home or whatever. Which is cool. I also do like how they insinuate for a while that Noriko dies. Like, I wish they had kept that part throughout. Or no, sorry. They kill Nono, right?
Uh-huh.
Yes. Okay, yeah. I like how that happened. I like that they actually had the guts to do that.
Yeah. And, even though I don't think the whole thing of using Earth as a giant missile makes a ton of sense, and they don't really explain why they wanted to do that very well, but it does kind of explain why, like, there's no lights on Earth, even though there's clearly, like, throughout Diebuster, there's clearly people living there. But, like, at the end of Gunbuster, Noriko's approaching Earth, and there's, like, no lights on the surface, which makes you think, oh, maybe humanity didn't make it, and then all the lights come on. The idea that they were using Earth as a giant missile and it had to be totally evacuated kind of explains that a little bit.
And it's a really cool idea on paper. I mean, like, from a visual and like style standpoint. The fact that it's Lauk who's the one being like, we gotta turn Earth into a missile, is like a dimension of her character I wish was explored at some point.
Yeah.
Like, just the fact that this is where her mind goes is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, as a whole, I think that episode 6 is a interesting conclusion. Like, it makes me think of like, is Reach for the Top 3 going to be like Noriko and Lauk teaming up now to finally defeat the monsters or something like that? Like, I really do hope that Noriko is in. Right?
I really do hope that Noriko is in Aim for the Top 3.
Because that would be fucking amazing. Like, I would love to see. Like, I'm a huge fan of like Rip Van Winkle type stories where someone just disappeared. The Futurama thing, right? Where you just like wake up in a society that's alien to you in the future and have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And it would be really, especially with how much of like Noriko's character we know, be interesting to see how she deals with that. Especially
that's exactly what I was
like,
thinking when you brought this up. Yeah.
Yeah, a new Buster world or whatever that she has no real relationship to, and she's still in the OG Gunbuster, and it's like, clearly not as cool or as capable as like anything else in the world at that point.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean,
that'd be a great angle.
I don't know what. I don't know what they're going to do for Aim for the Top 3. Like, I really wish it wasn't coming out in 2022. It takes a fucking long time for anime sequels, doesn't it?
Yes.
Like, how long has EVA 4 been in development?
Oh, I didn't even know it was.
Or is it the 4th movie or the 3rd movie? Am I getting them mixed up? I haven't seen them, but I know there's apparently one left.
I still haven't seen those, the newer ones. Maybe I should
haven't
watch those.
because it's the same reason I haven't read Game of Thrones, is like, I want to make sure the series is done before I invest myself into it, especially
that
with
makes sense, yeah.
the new EVAs. Yeah. I don't know what your overall thoughts on 6 were. Personally, I thought episode 6 was a satisfying conclusion to. It felt like a side story in the world of Gunbuster more than its own thing at that point, but I didn't hate it. It felt like an extended prologue to what I hope is a Gunbuster 3.
Yeah, I did really like the payoff at the end, but other than that, it was just okay to me. Like I said, I didn't think the action with Diebuster was very satisfying. And I mean, honestly, like, if they didn't tie it in with Noriko at the end, I probably would have thought it was just bad.
I agree. I would have been wondering what this had to do with Aim for the Top at all. If that was the case.
Yeah.
But it's nice to know they take place in the same universe in that way. And I again, like, I wish this was like a manga or something, because I think the exploration of, like, Noriko's legacy and stuff like that were, like, underused elements that could have been nice to explore.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just, like, a lot of things they could have done that they just, for whatever reason, didn't.
Yeah. I don't know. It's certainly a series, and I think it's worth watching. I don't know if I'd go back to it again until Aim for the Top 3 comes out, I think, as a whole.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a review or two that we can look at. These are really bad reviews. One gave it a 3 and one gave it a 4. So I'm going to start with the 4. So the 4, the reviewer didn't even like Gunbuster. So in the very first sentence is, it failed as a sequel to a failure, ... That's some talent. Joke aside, it's really bad, on the same level as the original Gunbuster, but unlike the original, it's not even so bad it's good, it's just bad.
What does this person like?
I'm not even sure. Here, I did look for their review of Gunbuster. Let's see. The reason I'm giving it a 5 and not a 4 or 3 is because it's short, and a lot of time it's so bad it's good. So they gave Gunbuster a 5. They said the characters are cliche and rushed, the plot is paper thin, and at times really stupid. And let's not talk about human tactics and weapons. It's as stupid as it can be.
Incredible.
But overall, what the series suffer the most from is the character development. It's so rushed that we barely care when something happens. The best example is Smith, and the instant he appears on screen, it's already obvious that he will die in no time, and he does, after having less than 10 minutes of interaction with the MC. So the MC is really sad and traumatized, but as viewers, we really can't connect with her.
I don't know where this phenomenon emerges from, of, like, a lot of, like, weebs and, like, anime diehards, like, more than I think any other fandom, are far too and insanely invested in these things. Like, it becomes a point of their personalities to let you know why something is good and or bad, relative to the other elegant anime they definitely like.
Yeah. Yeah, there's even a rule on my anime list for the reviews where it's like, please do not mention other anime. Just talk about this one.
Yeah, 100%. And it's just like, you know, talk about, I guess, like, Hideaki Anno in general, mecha anime. But, like, why, like, there's nothing about, like, I know, in my opinion, there's nothing about Gunbuster that's, like, cliche. In fact, if there is, it's because it was a very early mecha anime and sort of wrote
because it was
a lot of the
influential.
book. Yeah, exactly. But it still holds up. That's the part I don't get. Is like it's still good to watch. I really enjoy the hell out of Gunbuster, right?
Yeah. So at the very end of their Gunbuster review, they say if you want some better sci-fi, if you like the monster, Suisei no Gargantia has some really similar one, but with actual character and plot. That is Gargantia on the Verdurous planet, I think. And we talked about that, and it's definitely nowhere near as good as Gunbuster, and has, I would say, less character development. I don't know. I don't understand a lot of these reviewers. Like, I understand better the people who are just complete surface level. Like, I like this show because it has titties and giant robot fights. That makes more sense to me.
100%.
But if you're trying to be like, no, the character development is bad in Gunbuster, like, sorry, that's incorrect.
Yeah, and it's like I don't know, like it's you see this with a lot of like niche fandoms, but like I'm really curious as to like your thoughts on like the socioeconomic relationship between like the lives a lot of these people live and the investment they put into like this very specific genre of media. You know what I mean? Where it becomes sort of all consuming for them.
Yeah.
Because I really can't figure it out. Like, why anime? Is it this idea that like anime represents a better life somewhere else? Like, is that what it is? Like, it's.
I think that is a lot of it.
People, yeah.
Because a lot of these types think that it like there's a pretty well known idea that these guys like think that if they move to Japan, their life will be so much better, and they'll have like a hot waifu, and people will like them because they know all this stuff about anime and shit like that.
Yeah. But
And
that's a cliche. That's not actually like. Maybe I'm being naive, but do people actually think that?
I mean, there definitely are some people that do. I don't know if it's that prevalent, but yeah, I don't know. It would be interesting to like try and get into the psychology of weebs, for like a whole episode. I just don't know who I would talk to about that.
Yeah, like I could think of a few people actually.
Okay.
Yeah, like with my overall thoughts, like I don't know, like I get it in Japan, you know what I mean? This idea of like otaku, like you live in a very regimented, in a place that, its function as a society is extremely regimented. Your childhood is basically entirely built on this idea of like, what can you do as work, right? Like the way people are streamed into education systems and stuff like that entirely speaks this idea that like you need to figure out what you're doing and how to make money and be productive, and like anime.
Yeah, I mean they have like
largely,
special middle schools for like people who are like on a higher track.
Yeah, exactly,
like,
and that's like Food Wars
magnet
is like
schools that for
yeah.
middle school kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And like Food Wars takes place at one of those, right? Where it's like a school for people who are good at culinary arts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And stuff like that. So I get it there where like, people who are obsessive about anime, it's the dominant media form there, right?
Yeah.
Like of cartoons and like animation. But also it's like a really good escapist fantasy. But like people here who are psychotic about anime, strike me as extremely like odd. Like I don't know if you feel like alienated by society and escape into this hole of anime. Like most anime is speaking to, the function of Japanese society as being just like the fucking wage slavery you live under now, just times a million, right?
Yeah.
And stuff like that. Like I think what people don't talk about, like I remember this pretty aggressively, and a friend of mine who, mildly a weep, who moved to Japan to teach English and was a lot better about it than I think the cliche is. Was talking about like, yeah, every day you'd go out and you'd drink, and if your boss went out drinking, you weren't leaving until he decided he wanted to leave.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you also wouldn't leave you wouldn't leave work till like 8 p.m. because you don't leave until the boss leaves, right? And stuff like that. It's like, he's like, it's incredibly alienating because you just have nothing to do except sit there and work, and you wouldn't be allowed to have your phone because that wouldn't be kind, and that's just a function of how like you educate and stuff like that, right? And stuff like that. That's like, to what degree, like what do a lot of these people think they do in Japan? I don't know. Like what? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. I think maybe a lot of it for Westerners that are really into anime is like a function of sexual repression, because anime is very horny, and
Right.
I think the people that tend to get into it are really into the horny stuff. I mean, there's there's a type of guy on Twitter where they're like a really like alienated like fascist type, and you look on their timeline and it's just hentai, like retweeting hentai nonstop. That's actually my display name right now, is Alpha, who only retweets hentai.
Hell yeah.
Which is, I'm making fun of that type of guy. So maybe that has something to do with it. But yeah. I think we should
I guess,
have a whole episode about this.
Yeah, and like I guess the idea of like like the Edward Said thing, right? Like Orientalism and like fetishization also plays a role, but the idea of like the like meek ideal woman and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Like definitely probably speaks into it, right? But like people who write reviews, 1,000-word reviews. Like I looked up Diebuster on YouTube, and there's like a bunch of videos that are just lengthy defenses or teardowns of Diebuster. You know what I mean? Just like more than your average clickbait. Should you watch this or should you not watch this? But like, guys sitting in front of phone being like, or in front of webcam being like, okay, I'm going to talk at you for a long time about why everyone else is wrong. I invested the time into this. I definitely don't have notes, but I'm going to be riffing off the top of my head alone about why this anime is good or bad, right?
Yeah, and it's
one of these is an hour and 31 minutes long, by the way.
There is a lot of like people that are really into talking about pop culture all the time, like identify with it as like part of their personality. Like they feel that if you criticize, like this happened a lot with like Gamergate and Anita Sarkeesian. Like if you criticize anything or you say that in some way it's like not perfect, you're like insulting them personally, and they have to like react to it and defend it in order to like preserve their own ego. And then I think like on the contrary, there's like this type of guy that wrote this review where like they're defending their ego by like saying like how much, I don't know, like being contrarian and saying like how much smarter they are than the people who wrote the show or whatever.
Right.
Because like this whole thing is like about how stupid the show is, which fine, but like, dude, it's anime. Like all anime is stupid. Like especially sci-fi, like all of it is dumb. They all have like nothing is realistic. So like talking about the realism of the series is really just pointless. He's talking about how like, oh, the where is it? Worst of all, the world building, one of the aspects where the original wasn't all that bad, is here ridiculous. Basically, every Deus Ex Machina now works thanks to magic instead of techno BS, but aside from that, nothing has really changed in 12,000 years. Like, okay, yeah, it's like magic, but it's 12,000 years in the future, so just suspend your disbelief a little bit. Like, it's fine. I don't know.
There's a subreddit called Weeaboo Tales, which is definitely worth checking out. It's just people who have had horrible experiences with weebs, one way or another, and stuff like that. I'm not saying like every fandom has its toxic elements, but there's something very specific about the like, predominantly like like very white, slightly middle to upper middle class, like insularity of like this fan base that like leads. It's this idea that you're the smartest person in the world about anime.
Yeah.
Competing with everyone
Which,
else who also thinks
incorrect.
they're the
That's me.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. It's I will actually fucking advocate on this. Unless you're also reading, long texts on anarchist history and political science and economics, and also watching a ton of anime, you are not an expert in anime. I will go to bat for you on that.
Yeah. So this other review does the same sort of thing. They're complaining that they say, whereas Gunbuster used real hard science for its science fiction, not correct.
What the fuck?
Diebuster uses pseudoscience superpower nonsense. This and more serve as only a taste of how incompatible, for lack of a better word, the world building is, and why crafting a coherent world is always important.
I love the idea of hard science because there's literally a mecha in like the end of Gunbuster is a mecha transforming
doing karate
into
kicks.
doing karate kicks with like for some reason like I still can't get over it. I will never stop thinking about the fact that I built a space machine to have treads on it.
Yeah.
But just like not like physically impossible transformations of robots with like 9 million different machines. Like, why there hasn't been a walking tank yet? Because it is the dumbest from like a practical idea. It is quite possibly the dumbest military weapon you could ever create. Because you're just introducing joints and weak points into something and motors into something that could like ambulate over hills and rocky terrain with treads, which is what they normally do. There's a reason Gundam isn't real, and like we will never have a weapon to surpass Metal Gear because like taken to its like logical extent, it would be the most it's like something the king of Saudi Arabia would spend $1 billion to create, and like
I wish he would
fucking mega city. Honestly, yes,
I would have mad respect for him.
There is the guy who invested millions into creating a real life Gundam. I think there is that story.
Yeah. I used to follow this group called Mechanized Propulsion Systems that was like a bunch of mechanical and aeronautical engineers that were trying to create a walking mecha. And I haven't checked on them in a long time, but they did get a prototype at some point. And then they like sort of they didn't really use it very much, and they immediately started working on the like Mark II. And I just looked them up on Google Images, and they already have the Mark III version that has like the CGI rendering of it. They have like fake like machine guns on it. Here, I'll send you the link in the Discord.
It's extremely rad. I'm seeing like people have built them, but they're slow. They don't have weapons, and they look like. Honestly, they look like a stiff breeze could topple them over.
Yes. There's actually, I don't know if you've heard of Hands Off Eizouken. It's from last season. It's an anime about making anime. And there was a great scene in it where there's like a giant robot club. And they commission the main characters club, which makes anime. To make promotional anime for them, and they go through this whole thing where they're like, we have to strike a balance between like semi-realism and like being cool, because in reality, like giant robots are completely impractical and would never function for anything, and like the club president of the giant robot club is like freaking out and having a fucking breakdown. And then eventually accepts like, okay, yes, I know giant robots could never work in reality, but they're just so cool. I just love them.
That's incredible. When I was in Odaiba, which is a man-made island off of Tokyo, which is just, it's like going through to like, I don't know, it's like a presentation of all these tech companies that's permanent, where it's just like all this cool technology that they're building, all this like interesting concept cars and shit like that. Like it's gross, but also very cool to visit because it's just like a giant tech tourist trap. They have a giant Gundam statue there and a bunch of other like smaller Gundam concept things.
I have seen I've seen pictures of the giant Gundam statue.
I'm pretty sure there is a little note in English that, because a lot of these, like Toyota had like a futuristic concept car that's being like, in 2030, we might have cars like this, and that's what Toyota is working towards. I'm pretty sure by one of the Gundam exhibits there was a thing being like, these are unfeasible. Yeah, I mean, like, it's just something cool we have here.
Yeah. The original Gunbuster, while it could be a little silly at times, had a rather serious military tone, which totally disappears in the sequel, with silly robots, silly hats, even more broken physic. The tone is way closer to Gurren Lagann, which isn't a problem in itself, but it breaks the continuity between the two, quote, seasons. And if that was all, it wouldn't be much of a problem, but everything else is broken. The story goes nowhere. Just end with a big monster appearing out of nowhere because of one of the most stupid logic.
Incredible. Incredible.
Let's see, what else? And the other one, I think, I forget which one, but one of them is like talking about how it's not as funny as Gunbuster, which I thought there was only like one or two like actual jokes in Gunbuster.
Gunbuster was
that I can think
extremely
of.
serious.
Yeah. So I don't know what they're talking about there. The reviewer that gave it a 3 actually isn't as bad as I thought, honestly. But 3 is a very low rating. Because they're just saying it's mediocre, which, like, if it's mediocre, you give it a 5. They think the mecha designs are awful. That's really weird. Buster machines are now biomechanical machines that can only be piloted by people with some hereditary superpower gene rather than robots that take skill for any able-bodied person in general to pilot. They each come with different powers, including the ability to freeze space creatures in space with quantum temperatures, and controlling and turning other ships into creatures to use during battle via psychic powers or something akin to that. What are they even talking about there? Let's see.
It's fairly ridiculous. I know we're like long on time here, but like there was a great thing going around Twitter yesterday, which was like Roger Ebert absolutely bodying an entire subset of nerds, and someone pulled a quote from his book where he said, like, a lot of fans are fans of fandom itself. It's all about them. They have mastered the Star Wars or Star Trek universes or whatever, but their objects of veneration are useful mainly as a backdrop to their own devotion. Anyone who would camp out in a tent on the sidewalk for weeks in order to be the first in line for a movie is more into camping on the sidewalk than movies. Extreme fandom may serve as a security blanket for the socially inept who use its extreme structure as a substitute for social skills. If you already know what to say to each other, which is much safer than having to ad-lib it. Your fanish obsession is your beard. If you know absolutely all the trivia about your cubbyhole of pop culture, it saves you from having to know about anything else. That's why it's such excruciatingly boring to talk to such people. They're always asking you questions they already know the answer to, which, in typical Twitter fashion, people have been taking this quote and saying that Ebert is, was prejudiced against neurotypical people and autistic people, which is, I think, is dog shit, because the idea that like autism relies on a weird obsession isn't of itself like mildly offensive to me as someone who is like neurotypical.
Yeah, that seems pretty offensive to me too.
Yeah, but I think that like pretty well describes the ethos of this fucking reviewer. You know what I mean? It's not about the thing he's watching. It's about like being able to prognosticate on his knowledge of anime as like a medium.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and just like, I don't know, thinking that, I don't know, like critiquing things without understanding, like, first of all, what it is you're critiquing, but like what actually makes things good and bad is like very common thing here. Like, I always think of this post by Jack Allison. I don't remember what exactly he was talking about, but he was talking about how he didn't like a series because it was like badly done, like it like thematically didn't make sense or something like that. You know, one of his like film TV critic type opinions, and someone replied to him like, I just like it because it has like cool fights and stuff. And he's like, that's totally fine. If you enjoy it on that level, I have nothing against you, and that is totally acceptable way to engage with it. I'm just telling you how I feel about it.
Yeah, and like that's really like I think the role of criticism in general is something like, you know, we could talk about for hours, but like criticism is inherently like should be like an academic pursuit, which isn't to say that people shouldn't do it, but like it's not just is this thing good or bad, right? It's like, is this thing rooted in how does it recontextualize what came before it? How does it speak to like culture as a whole? What does it say about the role of like media in our everyday lives? And like how does it feed into or challenge the impulses of like other similar work, right?
Yeah.
Like that is ultimately the role of criticism, and I think that like everyone has obviously the capacity to speak to things on that level, but like we've gotten to a point now where like, you know, a majority of quote unquote like criticism when it comes to like especially niche shit like anime and like video games are like, is it good or does it have a 7 or does it have a 10? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like are the two like polar opposites? Like I don't know. Like I'm you know this about me. Like I'm huge into like sneakers and stuff like that, and sneaker criticism. Like good sneaker criticism. Like the YouTubers who really get it are like, you know, Jacques Slade, who will like pull out a pair of Jordans that look a lot like other Jordans and be like, how does this speak to like the design ethos and the evolution and the material evolution of Jordans? Who is this for? Like, what's it trying to speak to? And then he'll talk about whether or not it's comfy, right? But like, you know, it speaks to like, okay, this is how this culture is evolving, and this is its place in that culture, and like, should you or should you not buy it based on those things, right? Like it's ultimately a consumerist pursuit, but it's different than guys who are like, dude, this is not going to resell very well. Don't buy it. It looks like a brick. And it doesn't go well with my, you know, Supreme hat or something like that. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sucks. If you ever want to do an episode on fictitious capital or the nature of fandom, consider me game.
Yeah, definitely. So let's do final thoughts here.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we kind of talked a lot about our overall thoughts on it. But do you have anything like to wrap up the show with?
Yeah, I think it's worth watching. I think that Gunbuster is much better, but I think Diebuster is worth watching at least once. I think that it's got like a lot of, it's far more entertaining than, than it has any right to be. It's not like something that'll stick with you or last with you as long as Gunbuster did with me. Like I remember Gunbuster. I've forgotten a lot about Diebuster at this point. I finished it yesterday, but it's I think in general it's an absolutely good series. That's like, you know, it's interesting to see two people take on similar material and the outcomes they get out of that, right? Like what they choose to focus on.
For sure.
Like also as an articulation of like how good Hideaki Anno is as a creator, right? Like to see someone handle the material just not as well.
Yes.
But yeah, those are my final thoughts.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. I mean, I think the fact that it's only 6 episodes means like you really can't waste your time very much watching it, especially now that we're all in quarantine and we're basically all just like baking bread and watching TV all day.
Fucking bread baking Twitter is I hate it. I hate it so much.
Oh, really?
I get so listen, I get it. You made bread. You're very proud of this, like, you know, sourdough you cultivated for 20 years and gave a name to or whatever. But like, I'm going to be a toxic fan for a moment and just say, you know, it's pretentious as fuck. People who are that obsessed with their sourdough starter. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a fucking hater. I probably am.
Maybe a little bit.
Yeah, 100% I am. I will self-crit. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's worth watching, for sure. I wish it were like thematically coherent. I think that is like one of the biggest things that you would notice if you watch both in a row is like there's a very overt theme that Gunbuster has, and it tackles it really well. And it's, you know, the through line for the whole thing. And with Diebuster, I don't think there's a clear theme that emerges from it. And I don't know, like, but you know, like we said, the action is really good. The animation is really good. So on that level, it's definitely worth it. I mean, the animation in Gunbuster is outstanding, but mainly like for its time, for cell shaded stuff. And you know, I know there's a lot of people that think that CG animation is worse than cell shaded, but I think that's a pretty absurd opinion to have. And you know, having like nicer looking, smoother animation is better than having like the hand colored, like choppier and less like elaborate, or what's the word I'm thinking of? Like
just like more spectacular. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's one thing to, I think it's admirable to like look at hand drawn animation, be like, man, they did this by sitting in a room for like 5 million man hours and created this.
Yeah.
But like,
they only had
also,
6 layers that they could work with.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean,
Why
both
would
are great
you-
examples of animation
Yeah.
at their time. And
I
yeah, I
also
think Diebuster is
don't
worth
know-
watching on that merit alone.
I don't know why you'd fetishize like people toiling over something that they could do better and smarter and have more creative freedom with in a computer. Like Gunbuster.
That's another thing that
admirable.
Hands
Yeah.
Off Isaacson talks about. Is
Oh fuck yeah!
one of the characters wants to hand draw every frame, and the character that's like more of like the business manager type person is like, look, you don't have time to do that. You have to tween. You have to use tweening, and like just look at it. It looks fine. Nobody can tell the difference between the CG and your hand drawn stuff. Just do it.
I was reading yesterday that Miyazaki's new film, there's after 3 years, there's about 30 minutes done because it's all
Wow.
hand drawn on ones.
Wow.
And like I respect that because, you know, he's a craftsman who puts care into his work, but also like this is what he grew up with using, right? Like this is what
Yeah.
he's comfortable with, and this is the medium he knows how to work in. Like if I don't know, Makoto Shinkai or some other like big anime film director all of a sudden went from like CGI to being like this next one's hand drawn. It's pretentious as fuck.
Yeah. Even among, like, even though we kind of ragged on it a lot and it's not nearly as good as Gunbuster, it's still better than, like, a lot of mecha anime that I've seen. And I watched a lot of it for this miniseries. Like, I've been seeing people talk about Macross recently for some reason. And Macross, like, fucking sucks, actually. It's really
I
bad.
was gonna say Macross is not good. I've actually seen that one and it's bad.
Yeah. So instead of wasting your time watching like Macross or something like that, watch Diebuster because it's definitely better than that at least. So,
Hell yeah.
yeah. All right, Abdul, thanks for joining me and talking about
Thank
Diebuster.
you.
Looking
thank
forward
you
to
so
aim for the
much.
top
Yeah.
3. Do you have anything to plug? I will say real quick, I really enjoyed your episode on Kim Jong-il's book on film. That was fucking fantastic. And so I would recommend
you.
anyone listen to that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, like the Kim Jong Il episode sent me down a rabbit hole. That was a lot of fun to go through. Where I read Kim Jong Un's polemical on like humanics, which is his personally created study of like humanities, of the
Humanics.
humanities. Yeah,
It sounds like
humanics.
Wibistics.
It really is like, it really feels like, you know, when you take a deep dive into like Poseidism or something like that, like
Uh-huh.
it was that level of like discourse, but somehow more obtuse. And then like it just led me to like looking at like dictatorships in general, and like reading a lot about Saudi Arabia and stuff like that, which I've, as like someone who's born Muslim, like always had a fascination in, and stuff like that. And it's, yeah, I highly recommend that episode. It was a lot of fun to record. Kim Jong Un, bona fide filmmaker, really incredible filmmaker, or film scholar, I should say. Yeah, I have a podcast called Kino Lefter at Kino Lefter on Twitter. We are a podcast that aims to take a deep and left-leaning look at whatever movies are new and hot that week in theaters, from the idea that every piece of art is somehow a political document that reflects and looks at the culture as a whole. And you can also follow me on Twitter for my spectacularly bad takes at Abdul Y. Malik. Please do not at me about my thoughts on the USSR or the Holodomor. I will not reply to you. I won't block you. I just don't give a shit. But yeah, no, those are the two things you can check out. And thank you so much for having me on, Ryan. I know we went 2 hours and 10 minutes, so whoever made it to here, I'm proud of you.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be able to cut down the time a little bit, but
Hell yeah.
yeah, I think most of it was good, so probably
Cool.
keep most of it in. All right, man. Thank you, and thanks to everyone for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.